All right, let's go, fellas. So it looks like we got the 44 bounty, 55 bounty on stars. The GG 50 bounty on Sundays is a freeze out, which kind of sucks, but it is what it is. I think the I think GG has an issue when their tournaments get over 5,000 players. So on Sundays they'll cap a lot of tournaments that get relatively big. So I think a bunch of times they've had issues when they run tournaments that have like a lot of people in a couple tournaments and their software kind of crashes. So I would assume that's why they end up doing that. Standard ISO here with the 10s. And yeah, for what it's worth, this stream did go over pretty smoothly. So definitely dealing with internet issues. Calling up my internet provider today and see if we can get something a little stronger so we don't run into the same issue we had yesterday. So interesting spot here, I guess. I would assume that we're probably all going to be betting here. I would say that like checking is an okay option. I think the more that our pair needs protection, the more we want to be betting here. And then at the same time, I think this player up here, he's I don't know how many hands he has, but he's got a 50% VPIP right now. So in general, we can just kind of play our hands a little bit face up against players like this and just bet for value. So this is interesting here. I think I'm about to bet. I'm not quite sure what I end up doing. I guess we can take you guys 2 cents. Once we bet here on the flop, and then we get this turn, what do you guys want to do here? For what it's worth, I might try to pull up Odin. It's going to be kind of difficult to run this specific spot because we're facing a limper here. But we could just play it like he's in the big blind as well. Gore likes betting 3/4. What up, Slammer? What up, ESG? DMC, what's going on? So yeah, you guys just coming in here. We ended up ISOing versus a limp here with the pocket 10s. C-bet the flop, and now we are on the turn. Checks to us again. So we're just wondering what we want to do here on the turn. And I'm going to try to set this up in Odin. Again, it's going to be kind of difficult because of we are ISOing versus a limper. But I'm going to try to set it up as best we can. But yeah, for what it's worth, I think this turn decision does get interesting here. Slammer says bet 60%. Final Flood says bet half pot. Versus most likely a wreck. Yep, I would agree with that too. Should get us a check back. From them we can control the pot with the size of the bet. Yep, I think those are good points. And I just about have this on Odin here, so I won't spoil the answer here. I'm pretty curious what I do myself, actually. Sorry, I don't know what the hell just happened. Okay, yeah. We just ISO'd versus an under the gun limp, and he ended up calling. We c-bet on the flop, and now we get this turn. But either way, I guess I'll pull the results up, or we can go through the hand first. So I ended up betting small here, and we get the snap fold. So I think this turn card is kind of interesting. So for one, I think we can definitely get value here on the turn for Morris hands. I mean, I have no idea what this limping range is going to be. Yes, he should have some, I would assume, like ace-6 through ace-deuce, basically. So this ace does hit him sometimes. But it's also going to hit us a fair amount as well. We're going to have hands like pocket aces. We're going to have ace-x of clubs. Maybe even a hand like ace-4 or ace-5 of hearts, I would end up c-betting here sometimes. So I do turn this ace when we are betting our wheel draws. So kind of a neutral card. He's also going to have, I would assume, some 7-6, some 6-5, maybe even some 4-3. Again, it's really difficult to kind of put a range on this player who's limping because they could just kind of be limping whatever. So the closest I could get to this spot, I just did this low jack versus big blind. And this is our c-bet frequency on this board. Again, I think I had mentioned that with the pairs that are a little more vulnerable, we want to be betting a little bit more. So you can see that's why we have a little bit more bet with like 7s through jacks, and then aces, kings, and queens start checking a little bit more because they need a little bit less protection. Also, this board in general should be better for the big blind's range here. Although this is a limper, this is the closest we can play to the spot. So anyway, we did end up betting here pretty big. And he ends up calling. I don't think we really need to look at this range too much. And where things get a little interesting here is on the turn here. We see a pretty high frequency lead here. Like we've got a like 31.5% lead here on the turn. And I think a bunch of this might be because we decide to bet so big on the flop. I think which means we're going to have a lot of like pairs that are essentially 7s through kings. And I think a lot of his villain's check calling range versus a bigger bet here is going to be a lot of wheel ace-x. I don't think our opponent's allowed to fold any pair with an ace, like ace-6, ace-3, ace-deuce. So I think our opponent has all of those hands. So this card, even I expect it to be better for our range, but if we have this much of a lead percentage from our big blind, it's going to hit him relatively well at the same time. That being said, he did end up checking here. So we'll kind of see what our hand wants to do here on the turn. And this is kind of another thing that I didn't mention here as well. That with our specific suits, I think we had, let me check real quick. We had, oh, where's my screen? Okay. We have the 10 of clubs and the 10 of spades here. Okay. So I was going to say, I think it's kind of bad to double barrel here with clubs. Not that it's terrible, but we want to be doing it at a lower frequency. And you can see here, our club combos are checking quite a bit more. This means that there's a less likely chance that our opponent is calling us with a flush draw, which means hands that we end up beating here. So we want to be checking a little bit more with a hand like this. And then you can see with the pocket 10s that unblock both clubs and diamonds are betting at a far higher frequency than all other combos here. So I think this is definitely relevant when deciding to bet or check. But I think really where my decision kind of came to is that we're playing against a recreational who's like, you know, going to be super wide here. So I'm kind of just okay with value towning him. Also, if we end up betting on the turn and we get a raise here, I think we just have the easiest fold ever because I don't think they're really going to find the appropriate bluffs and maybe just play like a lot of their hands like face up, like the 6-5s, the 4-3s, you know, things of that nature. So interesting spot here anyway. Yeah, I agree, Fountain Flood, for sure. But we did bet a little bit bigger on the flop, so there's a chance that even a player like that is going to tighten up a little bit. So, and this looks like we ended up calling cutoff versus an MP open. Probably rolled here on the flop. I think we get to bet or check. I think with our king high flush draws, we do a little bit more checking than we want to bet, mainly because it has the most amount of showdown. But betting would certainly be fine here too. And then on the river, I'm pretty sure we don't have value. Oh, we had 2 kings. All right, so lost a minimum there. And again, if you guys, if we happen to gloss over a spot that you guys want to check out, just hit us up in the chat because I'm just going to try to breeze through as many spots as we can get through here. Same with you, Steve. If there's anything that we kind of breezed over that you want to ask any questions about, yeah, just let me know.
So I noticed you're min raising here. I remember we just talked about before when you were like opening bigger on the shorter stacks.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about that briefly for a sec?
So at least what I'm seeing with Odin.
Change your tune on that.
Yeah. Well, for one, I'm gonna say this is a loose open. This I think I have like 4K here, and with the bounty, it's like we have 2,800. So this is like a 14 big open, which is probably a bit on the loose side. I think it's fine, but we specifically need to be a little bit tighter with our pre-flop opens on shorter stacks when we're playing in a bounty tournament, because people are more incentivized to call when they have us covered here to try to play for our bounty. So although I think this open is fine-ish, I think it's definitely on the loose side. And if I was playing against like a stronger, like more aggressive field, I think I would end up. I think this would be a decent spot to fold. But in terms of raise size, at least what I've seen from Odin is the shorter that it gets, the smaller the open size they want to end up using here. So I think basically anything between 15 and 25 bigs, they're using like a min open, and I think it's like 30 bigs over, they end up using like a 2.2. Essentially, if we have like a shorter stack, I think they like us opening smaller a little bit more. But that might also go into the fact that when we open on 20 bigs, Odin's assuming that everything else, like every other stack, is 20 big blinds. And I think when there's a lot of reshove stacks behind you, that you're a little bit less incentivized to put in more money, unless you're going to severely tighten up your opening range because of the fact that you're more likely to get reshoved on when there are reshove stacks, as opposed to playing a little bit deeper and you don't face as many of those 3-bet jams. So those are just my assumptions when it comes to that. I could be off on that, but and
Loose open here.
yeah, for sure. Small 3-bet size too, though, so I don't think we can fold a hand like this. I think if we're like 30 bigs, I definitely end up folding. But at 40, I think it's probably okay. Also, we had one of the weaker players in the blinds as well, so I was a little more incentivized to open there. And this guy here in the big blind, I think I also said I was going to open a little bit wider because with this guy so short, I am a little bit incentivized to play a pot in position to try to play for this shorter stacks bounty. But in normal terms, I would absolutely say that, yeah, it's definitely too loose. So I think this is going to fold to us. So this is an interesting spot here too. I think, what are the levels here? I really wish it would show here something where the sizes are. I think it's 3-6. Yeah, I think it's 300, 600 right now. Starting stack is 25K. So essentially one starting stack here for the bounty is like 6,200 chips here. So basically when we're doing the math in this spot, we want to take, since one bounty here is about 25% of the buy-in, you want to subtract 25% of the starting stack off from here. So if this is 17.5 bigs, let me get my calculator out real quick. So 17.5 times 600, that's 10,500. So we want to take 10,500 chips and subtract it by 6,250. And that's 4,250. So this is essentially like this guy has 4,200 chips right now. So that's like 7 big blinds. So in this spot, we kind of have to take that into account when playing for a bounty. Obviously, this would be a fold for 17.5 bigs here. But
Did you do that right?
What's up?
Did you do that right? Just want to double check. You did that right? You have
The math?
6,000 chips off. Yeah.
Yeah.
6,000 chips off his stack?
6,250 because starting stack is 25K and the bounty is 1/4 of the buy-in, so you want to take 1/4 of the starting stack off from that. Now the only thing that I question is if it's 3-6 or 255. It might actually be 255 here. So I'm actually going to do that again real quick. So 500 times.
That's even more of a call.
Yeah. So. Yeah, absolutely. So why am I brain farting here? 500 times 17.5 equals 8750, and you want to subtract, yeah, even more of a call there. So it's like he essentially has like 4 or 5 bigs here. And when playing for the bounty, I think we definitely need to end up going for this. The only thing that sucks in these spots is that people never jam in these positions wide enough. So a lot of times, like, yeah, we are going to have the worst hand, but that's not really relevant. It's the fact that, you know, we're getting the right price to play for a bounty. It's essentially like opening up a hand and then a guy like just doesn't have enough chips where we can be folding any 2 cards, where even though we know we're calling and we're going to be behind, the price that we're getting on the call is still good enough where we can still make a profitable call even though we know we're going to be behind. If I'm not explaining this very well, we can try to go over this. I think we can use like ICMizer and not Hold'em resources. What's that other free tool out there? Equilab. To end up calculating percentages to let you guys know whether or not you are getting the right price to make a call, even if you know you're going to be behind once you do call. So if that's something you guys want to touch on in the future, we can absolutely cover that if some of that went over you guys' head. But yeah, again, I think this spot is kind of gross, but I was going to say, are we folding here? Yeah, okay, well, I wish I would have seen this earlier. So to actually see the chips out here. So yeah, I think I came up to the conclusion that, we've got the price where we need to call. And even if we see this hand, like we're still getting the price where we have to call. So even if the cards are flip face up, I think we still end up making the call here for the price that we're getting. And I think I'm just bitching about how. Go ahead.
In KOs early in tournament, get these tournaments, but then tournament goes on, like your stack becomes a lot more valuable. So like that 6K chips will be a lot more valuable later in the tournament. While now get to take it off your stack, it makes it really short. But if you're doing that calculation late, it's not going to be the same, and you'll be wanting to call much less as it gets deeper and deeper in the tournament, pretty much.
Right. We're just playing pure chip EV right now. I mean, there's really no. I mean, technically there's always ICM, but it's not to the point where.
I'm not even talking about ICM. I'm talking about let's say okay, the stacks are 70K in the middle of the tournament, right? And someone shut. And you're taking 6K off 70K instead of taking 6K off 10K, right?
Oh, right. Yeah. So essentially, one starting bounty, if the tournament gets deep enough, may not even be one big blind. You know what I mean? So, yeah, and that's why it's important to kind of be able to do the quick math when trying to figure out whether or not you're getting the right price to call for a bounty. I think a lot of people just see a bounty and they call regardless without kind of understanding what kind of price they need to end up getting that. And I think it's kind of important. I don't know what sites you guys are playing on, but I at least know on Stars and GG, there's a lot of these bounty tournaments. They're the tournaments that usually get the biggest guarantees. So, yeah, we need to be at least somewhat sharp when it comes to calculating bounties. And here I think I had 12.5K, which is essentially I think a little less than 10 bigs or something right around there. So I think we would just pure jam in this spot. Normally for 18.5 bigs, I think I would just min raise in this spot. Probably raise fold. But we'd definitely get the price to call against the other player here. And you see somebody going for the bounty here with a ridiculous hand, the Jack 6. So this is just kind of an idea of how crazy people are with bounty hunting. Try to skip ahead here a little bit so we get less dead air. Pretty standard spot, I think, right here. I don't think we have a 3-bet non-all-in at this stack size. I mean, especially with the bounty. So we have 4,200 here, take off 1,200 chips from 5K starting stack. So that's we have 15 bigs. So we're definitely playing jam or call in the spot. I mean, we wouldn't call with this hand. I'm just saying if we had plays, we would not have 3-bet non-all-in. The hand's still so hot right now. Nice.
And you still in LA? Okay, you're around right now.
Yeah.
Nice.
I'm gonna drive home after the session.
All right, nice. I was hanging with MVHQ boys.
Yeah, it was a good time.
Sweet.
All right, so I guess what are you guys doing in this spot with King Jack? Calling, jamming?
Not always, but I'm definitely jamming sometimes here.
Actually, I should probably pull my charts up just in case to reference what we should be doing here. I'm kind of curious myself.
I'm jamming less in a bounty tournament when I'm covered, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely something to consider here, but yeah, I don't mind it for sure.
I actually think in terms of what you were saying there, when we are covered, we might want to be jamming even more because the chances of us getting called by a worse hand kind of go up because they're playing for our bounties. You know what I mean? So I think in these terms, we should actually be a little bit more on the aggressive side when it comes to our opponents having us covered. Slammer's calling, Gora's jamming, Fountain of Flood thinks it's an easy shove with the bounty. That's a move says jam. What are you doing, Steve?
Yeah, this is really close. I feel like I probably jam a little bit more, but I think I flat sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious what the charts say here. I think I'm probably jamming a little bit more with the offsuit version and flatting more with the suited version, but I am very close on this spot.
Okay, and for what it's worth, this is with the bounty in play. I think this is around a 17 big blind jam. So we'll check out 20 here first and just see how we're supposed to be responding. So you can see that the King Queen off is the only King X hand that we're really jamming at this stack size. And then a lot of the other ones really want to be these offsuit Ace X ones, like the stronger ones here. A little bit of random King 6 suited thrown in here. But yeah, bottom line is at 20 bigs, we're doing a lot of calling here in general. I think calling with these hands is like pretty good as well because for one, when we just call, we keep our opponents weaker like King X and Jack X in there where they're just going to fold if we end up jamming. Now that being said, since there is a little bit of jam here with King Jack, I might actually ramp this up a little bit more because I think that, like I was saying previously, I think with the bounty factor and our opponent having us covered, that there is a little bit more likely chance that our opponent just calls us with worse here. So I wouldn't hate a jam with the King Jack. I don't even think I ended up rolling for it and just called, but looking back at it, I think it's probably okay to throw in as a jam. We can check for 15 as well, because I think at this stack size with the bounty in play, we're probably closer to 15 than 20. And you can see, even for 15, we're still doing a lot of call here with King Jack off, King 10 off. I'm not sure how much you guys are jamming with like these suited King X's here, like the King Queen through King 10, the Queen Jack, Queen 10 suited, things like that. But you can see how much flatting is going on here with a lot of these suited Broadways. And then most of the jamming frequency is coming from pairs and Ace X hands here for the most part, and then some King Queen offsuit. So, and you can see the King Queen suited is pure calling here. And again, this is mainly because, not because the King Queen offsuit is a stronger hand, but because the King Queen offsuit benefits more from getting immediate folds because it plays a little worse post flop than these King Queen suited, King Jack suited, King 10 suited, stuff like that. So yeah, little spots like this, just good to end up studying, just to keep your brain fresh, to see at least what you should be doing or if you should possibly be mixing in these spots as well. So what are we doing versus this this bet here? What's up?
No, Fountain and Flood is short. But if those ranges are under the assumption we benefit from folds, as you said, we might not want folds with King Jack.
Correct, and the main reason is because we keep in the worst King X and Jack X that our opponent's going to be opening. Like our opponent should be opening like down to King 6 suited, I think, from the cutoff, as well as like Jack 8 suited. So he just ends up folding those hands a lot when we end up jamming. Yes, it's nice that we get to take the pot down when we're out of position. I think that's like a decent win in and out of itself. But also, it's also pretty beneficial because when we hit cards like the King or a Jack here, these are normally going to be good cards for the pre-flop raisers range. So not only will we keep their worst King X and Jack X in there, and they're just going to pay us off whenever we make top pair, but I also expect them to bluff pretty heavily when the cards that hit us pretty well end up coming up here on the board. So there's really a couple good things going on by calling these hands in this spot. So I think a pretty easy check call versus c-bet here. I don't think with 2 overs and the King of Spades we can never do anything but call. I'm just kind of curious if we ever get any check raise. What ended up happening here?
Interesting. I think you let that.
Oh, so
I think you led the turn.
So I probably rolled here on the turn. And again, I'll show you guys the results here. I haven't actually looked at them myself, so we'll look at them together. But for one, I guess I'll say, what do you guys do here versus c-bet on the flop? Do you check call? Do you check raise? Do you check fold? And then from there on, if we do end up check calling as we did here, do you guys think we get any lead with his deuce of clubs? And again, I haven't checked out the results here, so I'm going to find this out myself in real time. I know in this specific spot, I ended up rolling here. I don't think this hand just pure donk leads on the turn every single time, but I'll let you guys know my reasoning once I get your responses here. Slammer says they like leading. That range, or I'm going to say you mean the deuce smashes us more than anything. I think our opponent still has an overall range advantage on this board, but I definitely think we have more deuce X here than they do in their opening range. We should have every suited deuce X in our range here. Found flip would still check. And for what it's worth, I would still check here myself at times. Again, I'm pretty sure I rolled for it here. Kenny's definitely floating the flop, but probably not finding the lead as much as she should be. Curious on the results. So am I. This lead could be completely off. So I'm not saying this is the end all be all. What do you think, Steve?
I definitely don't. I don't lead here. I don't know if I have much leading range on this card. But I do know that we've been looking at some of these like lower on that bottom pairs. I do remember some of these Odin spots we've been looking at where this is a good lead. I just don't know what the 2x specifically if it would be. I'd probably like it a little more than 3x. I mean, you do still have some 2x's in your range for sure. I wonder if you are leading here, are you shoving most rivers? I would imagine you probably are, but I'd like to get your input here because I probably don't lead enough in this spot.
Okay.
Like very little leading in this particular card.
Okay, so I guess first of all, I mean, I don't think there's really much of a difference between the 3x and the deuce X here. I think they're both pretty, like, not great cards. But that being said, we're still going to have, like, all the suited, like, 3x and deuce X's in our big blind defending range. So the fact that we're going to have a lot more deuce X in our range than the cutoff is, that's what immediately just makes me think that we probably get some lead on this card. I'd even be a little bit more likely to lead on the deuce or the 3 as opposed to the 7 pairing here on the turn because I think the cutoff is going to have more 7x in their opening range than 3x and deuce X. Again, I would not be doing this full frequency. I'm sure I rolled and probably rolled high here. So decide to continue. Now, if our opponent calls, I'm probably giving up on non-spade rivers here because I'm definitely going to have some flush draws here that I would play some lead on the turn as well. And then if the river comes a flush, we're also blocking those hands too. I expect our opponent to call with like some ace high, some like ace 4, ace 5, even some like pocket 5s, pocket 6s here. And then there's going to be some rivers that are kind of difficult to play through. So we'll just finish this hand and see how it plays out, and then we can check it out in Odin. And then easy fold here, of course. So this is what we have here for, I just did 20 bigs, cut off to big blind here. And you can see our opponent is betting about 66% of the time here, mainly using the 1 big blind size here. So our opponent is mostly c-betting small. I think they ended up c-betting third pot here. So we're going to do this. Now, my first question was, with the king-jack, do we ever get check-raise on a board like this? And it looks like the answer is no. And I think that's mainly because the king-jack is just too strong overall to end up bluff raising in a spot like this. So even though I have the spade, it still mainly wants to call. But then we can go down to like the king-6s, the king-5s, the king-4s. You can see that these hands with the spade want to be bluff raising much more than they're check calling. And I think that that's for a few reasons. The first reason being that overall, the king-6 or king-4, its overall hand strength is not as strong as the king-jack suiteds. So there's a little bit more incentive to be bluff raising with these hands. And the second reason is that with the king 6 to king 4, these actually have a little bit more equity when we check raise and our opponent calls us, because we're able to turn backdoor straight draws here as well as some pairs. So I think that's why we see more check raising from the king 6 to king 4 region, and we just pure check call with the king jack in this spot. You can see the same thing happens with the king 10, and then obviously the weaker we get, the more we want to end up turning these king X's with the spades into check raises here. So that's pretty interesting. So we ended up check calling here. Turn was deuce of what? Deuce of clubs. Moment of truth. Do we get any lead here? The answer is no. We do not get any lead. I mean, we have very little, but it's only 5% lead here. So essentially for me, that is not enough for me to start leading a spot like this. Now, again, go ahead.
No, I'm just thinking about it in my head right now.
Yeah. So, and again, so the reasoning I think that we probably get some donk lead from here is because you see all these suited deuce X's that we're still going to have here in our range. So we have all these hands that our opponent is just not going to have. Like maybe our opponent has some king deuce suited and ace deuce suited, but other than that, they're not really going to have any deuce X here. So I just assumed that with us, even though we definitely don't have a range advantage on this board, we definitely have like a nut advantage now, because we're going to have more deuce X than our opponents will. And again, you can see there is a little bit of lead from these cards, but then you can see with our specific hand, it doesn't really lead at all. I mean, what is it, like 1% donk lead here? So I would just simplify things and just pure check in this spot here. So I was definitely off in this spot here. And but again, I mean, this is nothing like I'm too upset with. I think I've been working on these spots a lot with Odin, so it's kind of nice to see when these donk leads come in and when they don't. Again, I feel like my reasoning is kind of okay to start incorporating a donk lead, but clearly Odin like strongly disagrees with this. So yeah, might end up looking at this one a little bit deeper off screen a little bit later and see if I can come up with some better conclusions as to why we really don't have any lead there. I would assume we have at least a little bit more than 5%. So yeah, interesting spot.
Wait, what was the river?
He jammed and I folded.
Oh, he jammed.
Yeah.
You led the river?
What's up?
You led turn, then checked river?
No, I led turn and he jammed on me and I had to fold.
Oh, he jammed on turn.
Yeah.
I think you already said this, but on the river, are you usually jamming in a lot of cards in that spot now that you led the turn?
I'm giving up on essentially all non-spade rivers at that point, because like I said, I would be leading flush draws, I would lead some 7x, I would lead some deuce x, I would lead some straight draws. So with my specific hand, having the king of spades, I think most of my bluff cards want to come from rivered spades, and then essentially be giving up anything else. Also, my overall hand strength in that spot is relatively high, so I think I probably have better bluffs. Like, okay, so the board was 7-3 deuce deuce, so I would much rather bluff like the 4-5, 6-5, 6-4 region, the hands that have like far less showdown in a spot like that. That also don't block the overcards that he might end up calling versus a block on the turn and then have to fold versus a jam on the river. So essentially, I'm giving up with my specific combo on any river that's not a spade. But clearly, all of that thought process was nothing close to what Odin was thinking. So I'm probably going to put some more work into that exact spot and try to figure out why we have zero lead there. I would assume the most part is because the cutoff is just there. Even though we do have a nut advantage, the cutoff is still at a pretty massive EV advantage on a board like that, where I'm just going to be lacking a lot of strong hands on a pretty low board. So that's the only real reason I can think that we don't have any lead in that spot, just because of cutoff's overall equity advantage in that position. Loose open here, but I think it's fine. I think the 10-9, Jack-9, Queen-9s definitely get in here a little bit from the cutoff. Uh, I would call all deuce X suited here anyway. We can just check it out here real quick. Um, so this is what we are defending our big blind with here. So yeah, you can see we have every single suited deuce X in our range when we call here. We essentially have every suited hand that's not jamming. I mean, the reason the Jack 10, Jack 9, 10 9, King 8 don't pop up is because Odin's playing these hands as jams pre-flop. So, but yeah, every suited deuce X we have in our range here. And that's essentially why I ended up having some donk lead on the turn, because even though we are at probably an equity disadvantage in the spot, we definitely have a nut advantage once the deuce ends up coming on the turn. So, but again, clearly Odin did not agree.
You ever jam here? I'm assuming no, but I'm just like curious. Do you ever jam like this spot?
So I think that I like jamming a little bit more if we have specifically 10-9 of hearts, 10-9 of spades, 10-9 of diamonds, because when we do jam and we get called, it's more likely than not going to be by a queen. And then if we jam hands that at least have some backdoor flush equity, when we get called, we have a little bit more ways that we can improve versus a queen that has us in pretty bad shape. So essentially, I told myself that if I had these suited combos with the heart, spades, or diamonds, I would probably roll for some 3-bet jam. And then with this specific combo, I'm just going to pure call. Now, we can watch how the rest of the hand plays out, and I might actually pull this up in Odin as well, because I think that's a good question that you asked there. And kind of curious if...
Yeah, I'm curious like what percentage you would be. Like, I know it's not just like 100% jam with the 9-10 suited, I would imagine.
Right.
9-10 of hearts, but I don't know what percentage, yeah.
Well, I guess this is another question. Are you ever jamming here on the turn, or are you just calling?
Yes. Do you want to ask the room, or are you asking me?
I mean, I guess we can ask the room too.
Yeah.
Do you guys ever jam here versus bet on the turn? Pot's getting pretty bloated here, so Gora's calling. Again, don't be results oriented. There might absolutely be some jam here. I don't know if this is like a pure call for me or if we make some jam here. So I'm not sure what the answer is. We can look this up. Clearly, from the last example, we can see that every decision I make is not the end all be all. A lot of cards you don't want to see on the river. Well, I'm assuming mainly because they might kill your action if opponent has like hand like 8-6, queen 8, queen 6, stuff like that. I don't think for overall, I mean, obviously we have a hand that we're never folding. I would assume that you mean basically you don't want like scare cards to come up. If they do have like a 2-pair kind of hand, or even like a 4-5, if the river comes at 9, those hands are obviously going to go down in value quite a bit. But I also think that those are like a very small part of the cards that are going to actually hit. And I don't think we necessarily just want to be jamming because there could be a potential scare card that comes up. I think there's way more clean runouts here than actual scare cards. But I do think that probably comes into play as well. Like I said, I would not be surprised if we do get some jam on the turn for those exact reasons, Slammer. Even an ace can kill the action. Yeah, that could be true too, but I don't think we have like a ton of ace X in the spot. That's not specifically like ace 8, ace queen. And then even like ace queen might 3-bet jam quite a bit here on the flop as well. So it's going to be kind of hard for us to have a lot of ace X. Also, I'm not sure even if an ace comes on the river, if don't tilt can fold with the queen. If we do have like weak hands, that usually we're going to end up bluffing the ace pretty aggressively. And so yeah, that's actually a good question too. So
That is a good point. That I guess an ace can kill the action like queen jack, maybe like a couple other hands, queen 10, maybe like a few hands.
yeah.
Not a lot of them though.
So I think there's reasons for both here from what we said. I think Slammer made some good points. There are some cards that kind of kill action here. Specifically if our opponent has like 8-6 here. But again, I do think this run out is actually like very good for our opponent here. So even if they have a hand like 2-pair, I think they can still jam on this river pretty aggressively. I also think they just jam quite a bit with their overall range because this run out should be favoring the big blind's range a little bit more than ours. Like they're going to have way more 5x, plus all of the 2 pairs are going to have here. Like I said, I think 2 pairs can definitely jam here on the river for value, and we're still going to have hands like King Queen, Queen Jack, Queen 10, Queen 9, stuff like that are still going to need a hero here at some percentage. So I definitely think our opponent can be jamming here as light as 2 pair. And then obviously with this run out we call, and he has Queen 10 here, which is, it seems a little bit thin, but I think it's probably good. I guess I'll ask you guys, what do you think about this? And then we can dig a little bit further into this. Do you guys play this hand the same way? Do you guys check the river here with the Queen 10? If we check and then I end up jamming, do you guys call with the Queen 10? I think there's a lot of interesting things going on here.
Yeah. I will say just a comment about something else with the turn. Can you go back to the turn? Oh, yeah. So if the turn came like, let's say, 7 of spades, like 7 of diamonds, then I think it makes a lot more sense to be jamming onto this bet. You know, because I think that there will be a lot more bad rivers potentially, or he probably just has a lot of hands he's not going to give up with, and he's putting that much of his stack on that kind of wet of a board too. And I mean, I don't know if I'm off this assumption, but I feel like if the board becomes wet on the turn, then it becomes a little better to jam because it's so dry. It's probably a little better to just call.
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of what we're gonna do, if like the turn and river are like 7 of diamonds, 4 of diamonds, I don't think that really changes what we do with our hand so much because we're obviously gonna call. But in terms of like our opponent picking up extra equity, we might have a little more incentive to end up jamming because then they're going to have like some pair and flush draws or straight and flush draws combos that they just have to bet call it off with. So not so much in protecting our own hand, but we might be able to jam a little bit more because our opponent might pick up some extra equity where if we jam, they might just be priced into call with their straight and flush draws, and rather than like we just call and then the river breaks and then they just give up with their flush draws there. So yeah, in terms of our opponent having more hands that they can call us with, I think it's probably good to be jamming a little bit more high frequency on a bit of a wetter turn for sure. So yeah, so this is what we have here. We're betting about 66% of the time here. And I think I bet like quarter pot here. Again, my standard in a lot of these spots is just to bet a little bit more aggressively than Odin suggests. And also for a smaller size, because obviously like we can bet more hands the smaller we go. And basically what I'm doing is challenging our opponents to come up with the proper amount of check calls and check raises, which I don't think anybody does here. I don't think anybody defends out of position as much as Odin does here. So I think we can kind of get away with betting a little bit more aggressively than the solvers do here if our opponents aren't defending appropriately. So yeah, so in a spot like this, I'm basically rolling whether or not I want to go like quarter pot or half pot. And you see like every single size is used here between 1 big blind and 90% pot. So we ended up going small here. Yeah, I think we started we started with 30 bigs in this spot. So we ended up betting small, and our opponent had the Queen 10 of hearts, which you can see is essentially pure check raising in this spot. And that's mainly because this is basically one of the strongest hands our opponent's going to have in this spot. So they really don't have like ace queen ever because they're playing for stacks for 30 bigs cutoff versus big blind. So the strongest hands here are going to be like king queen, queen jack, queen 10. Even queen 9 is pretty full frequency like check raising here. I would assume we might start seeing some checking with the queen 9s through queen 6s. And so you guys can really see how aggressive big blind is with the stronger queen X portions here. And then they're a little bit more passive with the weaker ones in the spot. So yeah, pretty interesting to see what our opponent's doing here. So he finds a good raise size here. Just gonna see what the actual size he made it on the turn, just out of curiosity. So yeah, he did 5.2. So looks like he's been doing some Odin work. So he clicked the third pot button, which is clearly good here. Our hand is the 10-9 here. And you can see we do have a little bit of jam in this spot. I think you were asking that a little bit earlier, Steve. So it kind of clicks it or jams here. It does a little bit of both. Well, I mean, if it's put in 50%, it's obviously calling off here, of course. So we do see mostly calls from here. We can go to the suited versions, and you can see, even though this is still pretty low frequency, we're still getting a little bit more jam with the suited varieties as opposed to the offsuit ones. Funny enough, we see a little bit more jam with the 10-9 of clubs that has no backdoor flush draw potential, a little bit more than the 10-9 of diamonds, which does. Again, I'm not quite sure why we end up seeing this, but yeah, it's one of those things, I guess.
If I had to make an assumption, it's because you could have stronger hands in future streets with the other ones, while this one you can't improve your hand, really. If that changes it too much, that would be my assumption under it.
With the club varieties?
Yeah, like you can't improve the hand like on later streets, while like 10-9 of spades you can, 10-9 of hearts you can, 10-9 of diamonds you can. That's just an assumption I'm making. Yeah. I don't know if that's why it's doing it.
Yeah. Okay, so we end up calling here. Turn was 7 of something. 7 of clubs. I'm just going to go to the river just so we can see what it was. So 7 of clubs, 4 of hearts. And I think our opponent bet half pot on the turn here. And I would assume that they probably get to mix a little bit, but you can see that there's so much betting going on here because this 7 of clubs is so good for our opponent's check raise range here, because mainly our opponent is going to be check raising hands like 7-5, 10-9, 5-4, 8-7, 7-6, all kinds of that stuff. So this 7 really completes like a lot of draws and a lot of 2 pairs here, and I think this is why we see our opponent being so aggressive here on the turn. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the half pot size. I guess the closest one we're going to have here to get the best results is going to be third pot here. Also, if we're betting such a high frequency here on the turn, we normally want to be using a smaller size, which is why we see Odin using third pot here a lot more than 2/3. So yeah, we're going to throw that in there. Just pretty interesting to see how aggressive that the big blind is here on this turn card. And that's essentially because this 7 of clubs is just a lot better for the check raisers range than it is for our range here. And we have the 10-9, and looks like we are pure calling actually with both combos, the 10-9 off and the 10-9 suited. I wouldn't have been surprised to see a little bit of jam here for the reasons we said earlier. I think Slammer pointed those out earlier, that there are some scare cards. So even though I would assume we still want to be mainly calling, I wouldn't be surprised if we get a little bit of jam. Now you see the jam varieties mainly coming from hands that are a little bit more vulnerable than essentially the nuts here. So you can see hands like 8-7, Queen 8, Queen 6 here. They're wanting to jam a little bit more, mainly the 8-7 suited, because there's a lot more bad rivers for a hand like 8-7 suited than there is for a hand like 10-9. Like obviously with the 10-9, we're still like stacking off on every single river. It does suck if it kills action, but with the 8-7 suited, like literally any 5, 9, 10, Queen, 6, all these cards severely change the strength of the 8-7's range here. So I think this is why we see such a high frequency jam with these hands that are good enough to play for stacks, but require a little bit more protection than a hand like a straight would here. So I think this is pretty relevant information to kind of find out, because obviously like this is a really good card for our opponent, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have jams. It's just kind of nice to see the hands that Odin actually chooses to play as jams, their value hands anyway, and the ones that they want to end up slow playing. So I think that's pretty relevant information. And then 4 of hearts. And I think the main question here is, before I pull this up, I guess, before we see the results, with the Queen 10 of hearts, if you guys are in this player's shoes, are you betting here on the river for your last 14 bigs? So villain has a little bit less than half pot remaining. If you guys have Queen 10 of hearts here on this run out, are you jamming on the river? Agora's checking. Slammer, yes, but I'm a fish. For what it's worth, I don't know the answer here, but I wouldn't hate a jam or a check. So, yeah, we'll get into that a little bit more after I read off some answers. That's moves. I don't know. Feels like turning top pair into a bluff. That could be a thing. Yeah, I'll actually touch on that here in a little bit too, once we try to figure out how thin we want to be going for value here. Phantom Flood says tough spot. I think most of the time we are not bluffing with top pair. So it seems for the most part that you guys think that when villain jams here on the river that they're turning their top pair into a bluff, which I don't immediately think is true, although it could be. And like I said, I'll take a little bit of time to kind of think of how thin we can end up jamming. Because mainly the question that we ask here when we have Queen 10 is whether or not we get called by worse hands. So I'll ask Steve what he wants to do in this spot, or what he would mainly do. And then we can kind of touch on that and see what Odin's doing here on the river as well. Final Flood says, no, I think if we shove, we're bluffing. Okay, and that could very much be true as well. If we don't get called by worse hands, then we're definitely turning this hand into a bluff. So I'm not going to immediately dismiss that yet. So what do you think, Steve? What are you doing with Queen 10 of hearts here on this run out? Oh, lost his mic.
Yo, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm probably still jamming it, but I do have a hard time finding too many worse hands to be calling with. I mean, maybe like an 8-9, maybe like a Queen 9, maybe like 7-9 or something that he gets to here with. Like a little bit tough finding too many cards. I mean, maybe like I think he's getting here with like an 8-10. I don't know. I was not check raising it. And I probably still would be jamming, but I do have a hard time figuring out what hands you're getting value from.
Yeah, and I think that's the main thing too, is it's going to be interesting to see how light we're supposed to stack off here once our opponent check raises and double barrels here. I think you said you don't check raise flop here with 10-8. Did I hear that?
So I think usually I wouldn't be. I would say with the Queen 10. You're talking about the Queen 10?
No, I thought you said like 10-8's not check raising here.
Oh, okay. I'm not usually check raising with the 10-8. I do think it's reasonable on this board to be doing that with like a 10-8. But I also don't think I'm going to be like necessarily barreling off. I guess. I don't know. It's an interesting spot. Like I don't know if you're barreling off 8-10, are you going to get anything better to fold? Maybe you'll get a Queen X. Certain Queen X to fold. But it seems a little tough for you to get queens to fold on the river when there's just so much money in the pot at this point. He should be calling you all his queens really on the river, I think, when the pot's this bloated.
Yeah. So Phantom Flood says we might make king, queen, ace, queen, kings and aces fold. Tough to get value with Queen 10 was my point. Yeah, I agree with that for sure. So like I said, it's going to be interesting to see what ends up happening here. And you can see that we are barely checking at all here. We're only checking 7.5% of the time here. And reasons for this is because Odin realizes that this run out is so much better for the big blind's overall range than it is for our range here too. So that's why we see so much aggression going on here. We see as light as 8-7 here. Obviously, like even Queen 9 is jamming here for value. Queen 5 is straight, obviously, so 2 pair. So essentially the weakest jam for value we have here is Queen 9. Okay, let me see what else we have here just to see how thin we're actually going. So essentially, we're never seeing checks here from the big blind. And this is mainly because this run out is so much better for the big blind's range here than it is for this player's range here in the cutoff. So I think this just becomes a spot where they just end up playing every single hand as a bet. Now, what gets interesting here is the two sizes that we see here. We have the 10% bet size here being used about 37% of the time. And then we have the jam size being used the other 56%. So it's definitely like betting some smaller sizes. And you can see that with hands like the Queen 9 suited, the Queen Jack suited here. The ones that we're basically saying are a little bit on the thin side. And I think these bets really just kind of lock up what cutoff's going to end up doing here. because I think even if we bet like 10% here, that a lot of hands that are better than us are just going to end up calling here. Funny enough, King Queen still jams for value. Aces still jams here for value. I don't think anybody is doing this in game for what it's worth, guys. So I wouldn't really worry about this too much. I would say people are definitely like going to be pure calling here with King Queen, Aces. What else here for value? Queen 7, Queen 6. Even a lot of these hands, I think, might just end up calling from people in game once the 4-card straight comes out here. So I think these results here are definitely going to be a lot different than how our opponents are going to play versus a 10% river bet here. So this is somewhat relevant and irrelevant information, I think. It's nice to see what we want to be doing versus a 10% river bet, but I'm also pretty confident in saying that most opponents are not going to find the value jam with pocket aces, with king queen. King 8 even is jamming here sometimes. Like, you're just not seeing, regular opponents do this. So I think that's very interesting here as well. Now, once we do get the jam here, and you can see that Villain is playing this hand mostly as a jam. Funny enough, it's like the diamond and heart combos are mostly jamming, and then the club combos here are blocking here on the river. So versus a jam, I am kind of curious if they do get called by worse hands. They get called by Queen 9, which is obviously worse. Ace 8 is even hero calling here somewhat. I think having a 9 is probably not great because our opponent should be bluffing a fair amount of 9x combos themselves. So a hand like, where's our 9x region here? So like Queen 9, I guess, is just like too strong to fold here. Jack 9's no pair. So like a hand like Pocket 9s is just pure folding here. And that's mainly because I think a lot of the bluffing region from our opponent is going to come from the 9x version. So having a 9 here is kind of bad, unless it's specifically Queen 9, 10, 9, just for their overall hand strength. So yeah, I guess the main question here is, do we get called by worst with Queen 10? So we can see some Ace 8 is supposed to be defending here. Some Queen 9 is supposed to be defending here. 8, 6 is 2 pair. So yeah, there's a few hands that end up heroing us off here, heroing us here with that are a little bit worse, but there's not many that's not specifically Ace 8 and Queen 9. So, which is probably still fine because this is like probably the thinnest value jam, I would say, with the Queen 10 itself. So yeah, definitely pretty interesting here. I guess the other point was, do we make better hands fold than our Queen 10 here? And it looks like the answer is no. I think all of our Queen X combos are calling here. So all 2 pair combos, all King Queen, Ace Queen are all calling. Pocket Aces always calling here. So yeah, so essentially we're supposed to defend every Queen X here on the river. But I think this is a spot that's absolutely not being played by the population, like Odin is playing it here. And I think this is mainly because we are seeing Odin play the spot based on what its overall range is on this specific run out, as opposed to what our opponent's specific hand is here. And so I think we can learn quite a bit from this spot right here. I might actually dig into this a little bit more myself, just to kind of dig into the how much equity out of position has over in position's range here. I would assume it's quite a bit, because whenever you see, like, for example, this much bet on the turn here, that just says overall that this is going to be a much better turn for our out of position's range here. So that's why you see so much betting going on here after a check raise here on the flop. So yeah, definitely a really interesting spot here, I think. But yeah, overall, I'd say well played by our opponent here. So this might look a little wild to some people, but I think he played it pretty well for the most part. Now, do I think he knows if he played it well for the most part? I'm not sure. Like, but yeah, I mean, we saw a lot of interesting stuff in there for sure.
Kurt, against weaker fields, I know we've talked about this before, and I don't think you are opening, but like, let's say you're one spot over, or let's say you're, UTG1, UTG, UT or UTG1 here, with the twos, or I guess you're maybe even UTG2, let's say. When do you stop opening the twos here in this, or do you open from all spots because you're so deep and you want to potentially set mine? I know, like Odin, or I know the charts say not to open from like UTG1, probably UTG2 with the twos.
So
I'm curious if you follow or you kind of go a little bit off script.
So in terms of why I'm opening in these spots, a couple things go through my head. One is how many players do I have covered? Because I think once we have more players covered and we have pocket pairs, I think we're a little bit more incentivized to end up playing them, to potentially play for a big pot and play for somebody's bounty. Whenever we have more people covered, we're always going to be a little bit more incentivized to end up playing, so we can potentially stack people. And a hand like pocket twos, I think, is one that's going to play pretty simply. We can win a big pot. And if we have most of the table covered, that means we're always going to end up potentially playing for a bounty. And then the second factor is how tough I think the table is actually playing. If there's like, 3 or 4 good regulars in front of me, I'm probably going to be a little bit tighter because like a hand like twos doesn't play very well. I also don't see like stronger opponents just stacking off on like, boards they shouldn't be. So there's a little less value when you're playing against stronger players. And then if there's just a bunch of unknowns that I have covered, I'm going to start V-pipping a little bit more aggressively, even though the chart says to end up folding. So yeah, good question there too. Because we definitely want to switch up. We don't want to play exactly as the chart says. In bounty tournaments, there's always going to be other factors that come into the decisions that we end up making. And a lot of that is whether or not we have our opponents covered and we get to play for a bounty, and how strong we think our opponents are playing too.
Yeah, well, I think just one of the points that I'll reiterate that Kurt made is like the lower pocket pairs, you're a lot more incentivized to play when you're at the deeper stacks because you can get in a huge hand with a set against an opponent and hopefully win a big pot. So you're a lot more incentivized to play those. Like it's like 30 bigs deep, let's say 40 bigs deep with the twos in early position. He's a lot less incentivized to play and shouldn't be playing it well if he's like 80 bigs deep, 100 bigs deep, or covers. The opponents cover him, then he's more incentivized to play it.
Yeah, small pocket pairs play a lot better when you're deeper stacked as opposed to when you're short stacked, because they want to flop sets and take down huge pots. So the value in small pocket pairs goes up a bit more when you're playing deep stacked, and the same can be said about suited connectors too. So. Oh, DMV appointment. Sigh. Later, Agora. Good luck.
Wow.
All right, we'll skip ahead a little bit here. Dead air. 4 tables. Good dead air. Oh yeah, this is much of a spot. Remember this guy in the Sunday Mill last week? Just V-pipping everything. Yeah. So I don't think I'd be defending this. Also, when he just pots here, I just end up folding here, mainly when I see weaker players like making these big bets. And I think I said this on the stream too, is I don't necessarily think his bet size is bad on a board like that, but just in general, when I see weaker players who are limping all around and then they just end up, throwing out a pot size bet, more often than not, they are just going to have the stronger portion of their range as opposed to like some sort of draw or just like an overall bluff. So yeah, I ended up just folding there. Definitely gonna play a little.
The big blinds sitting out.
Yeah, so that's why I completed here. I think we probably could have still completed here anyway, even if we were in the small blind. But yeah, this is essentially like I'm big blind here. So this is kind of an interesting decision here. What do you guys do versus? So we get an open from middle position. It looks like this guy who ends up playing a lot of hands ends up calling from the cutoff, and then we are essentially in the big blind here with the 8-7 suited, facing a half pot bet. What are we doing versus half pot C bet and a call here? Yeah, I remember this day. I remember saying how crazy it was that on my stream, like a lot of you guys that I know from the Discord, I was seeing in the chat like, oh, first time chatter, found in flood. You know, I'm like, what? Like, how long has it been since I was actually streaming in here? Like, all these guys I've been doing all these sessions with, like, this is their first time on my stream. I'm like, wow, I was out of the game for a while. Yeah, that was crazy. All right, so what are we doing here, guys? Versus C-bet and a call here. Half pot C-bet and a call. We've got a gut shot here. Yeah, I think you could call it the higher V-pipper for implied odds. Yep. I think that's relevant for sure. That Smooth says I call or raise with a backdoor flush draw, but fold this hand. How about you, Steve? What are you doing here?
Oh. Probably fold, but maybe with the V-pipper, I would be calling a little bit more. I know, yes, Slammer's just typing, but I probably will fold here, but I'm not sure. It's very close. I feel like either option could be okay, but maybe it's more leaning towards call.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I guess the guy V-pipping makes you want to call a little bit more for sure. Like Found and Flood made a good point about that.
All good, Preacher. Sorry, man. And yeah, Slammer folds as well. So I think some good points were made here, actually. And I'm pretty sure I remember saying this on stream as well. Now, at first, I did want to call here, mainly because of the overcaller here. I think our implied odds go up quite a bit versus a wild player. So if we do hit our hand, the chance of us winning a pretty big pot is pretty significant. But also, we're also facing a half-pot C-bet. So not only do we have to consider this player, like, you know, us hitting the miracle card and then stacking this player, but this player is also probably going to be a little bit on the strong side too. When he bets half-pot into two opponents here on a board, I would expect them to be checking quite a bit, or at least I think they should be checking quite a bit. So I'm assuming this range is going to be stronger than it should be. So our hand's already kind of like weak as is. So I think I just ended up folding here, having like a dirty out to the 9 of diamonds potentially, and then just thinking that this guy's range is a little bit on the strong side. Now I think if he bets like third pot here, we probably get to call. If he bets anything bigger than half pot, I think it's an easy fold. So for what it's worth, I do think that this decision was close, and I don't really love folding or calling, but I just ended up going with the fold, I think, mainly because I thought the C-better's range was probably a little bit stronger than it should be. Betting a pretty big size on a board, I think they should be checking relatively high frequency. Ended up 3-betting here. I think this hand can call or 3-bet. I think mixing is good. Could argue that even hitting the 9 doesn't get you the bounty from the guy you cover, and you don't cover the blue tag. More of a call if you cover both. Yeah, very good point there, actually. So you see bet small on this board. I think we can be relatively aggressive here. I think the 6 and the deuce are not going to connect with imposition's range very much. So overall, we still have a pretty strong range here. And then the 5 of diamonds just like a really bad turn for our hand and our overall range. I think cutoff should be defending a lot of suited hands. He's going to have a lot of 6-5 suited, 6s, 5s, maybe some pocket 2s. So pretty easy give up for us without a diamond, I would say there. And now we see the 3.5x from this guy. I think probably a little too deep to play for stacks. I think another reason I called is because if big blind ends up jamming, we can kind of, we can just call easily.
This is kind of an interesting spot. So opponents like these, it's like, you know, I feel like usually calling is probably the norm here, but I think against opponents like these, I wonder how much you're working in a raise. Very curious, because this guy is playing such a polarizing style.
He's playing a little erratic,
very
for sure.
Polarizing. Yeah, erratic, whatever you want to call it, yeah.
What are you guys saying? What are you doing with 7s here versus, it's a little more than half pot C-bet. It's like 55, 60%. You got 2 7s here. We are about 40 bigs effective. Slammer says call. Fountain Flood's getting in there. Fountain Flood says, like, just calling here. If they're a little wild, they might just jam, and I don't like raise folding sevens. I think, so I don't know if I would raise fold versus a player like this, but I certainly wouldn't be happy with it. I think if we do raise, we probably have to play for stacks if they end up jamming and just kind of side call it off. But that also kind of sucks too. So I don't think we raise fold, but I also don't really want to raise and play for stacks here. What do you think, Steve?
I probably usually just call here. I feel like with I might start raising here with like nines and even like eights with the eight of hearts. I probably like it a little bit more. I mean, I don't know if actually with the eight of hearts it's better, not because you do unblocks as flush draws, so maybe it might be better to even be raising without. Probably actually better to be raising without the hearts. Now I'm kind of thinking about it a little more. It's close. I'd probably call sevens and then start raising maybe like nines. I don't know if it makes a huge difference. And I do like calling a little bit more when you have the backdoor hearts, I would say.
Yeah, actually, that point that you just brought up was, I think, the deciding factor as to whether or not I want to play this as a raise or call. I mean, obviously, with nines, you have a stronger hand, and there's more, obviously, more sixes through eights in his range if we raise with a hand like nines that he might just stack off with on this board. And then with sevens, he can have us dominated a little bit more with hands like eights and nines. So, and then the other point that you brought up about the hearts, I think is pretty good here. I think with the heart, our hand has a little bit more equity, so it does play better on future streets, and I might be a little bit more incentivized to raise without a heart because that way we don't end up blocking flush draws that he might play for stacks here that we end up getting it in with. So I think when we do block hearts here, and we do try to play for stacks, he's going to have stronger hands here a little bit more often than if we didn't have a heart. So I think that's a good point that you bring up there. So yeah, for that point, I just decided to end up calling and playing my position here. Not a good card for us. I expect him to be relatively aggressive on this turn. And then, of course, just as soon as I say that, he ends up checking. Now, okay, so before we do anything here, what are you guys doing here on this turn? Once we're checked to. Slammer checks back. Fountain Flood checks back too. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, really close here. I probably have a slight lean towards checking back. I mean, the king does hit him a lot more than it hits you, and I'm almost a little surprised he's not betting this card, so I definitely think he has some king X's in his range still. We could still have some pocket 8, pocket 9s, pocket 10s, jacks. He decides not to bet the turn here. Probably just with all that, a check back. It would really suck to get check shoved here also, and then have to fold. Probably slightly check back, and if you're betting, I would imagine it's going to be a very small sizing. We'll probably lead check back here.
Okay, that's a move. Said, go ahead.
Yeah, I feel like either option. My first instinct was kind of saying bet, honestly, but it just doesn't super feel right when I'm staring at this board. Probably slightly check.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the move. Says he bets and probably checks back the river if called. Okay. Summer says, I feel like he's checking because he wants you to bet so he can rep the king. Yeah, I mean, that could be a thing, but, he could also be betting on the turn to rep the king, when he doesn't have it. So, both things could be true. I did, for what it's worth, expect him to, be relatively aggressive on this turn. So I think that alone just kind of disincentivized me to put in money. That being said, I don't necessarily think that we just want a pure check here. I'm pretty sure I rolled. I'm okay with mostly checking here. I think I rolled I don't know, a 25% bet frequency here. I think betting is good because, and I probably would end up betting small the way stacks are set up here. mainly because if we do have a king, it's a hand that really doesn't require a ton of protection on this board. Same goes with us having a 5 as well. And then if we end up blocking here, I still expect our opponent to call with like ace deuce, ace 3, ace 4, pocket 6s, pocket 3s, pocket 4s, maybe even some like ace queen. They just end up calling here, like who knows with a player like this. So I do definitely see our opponent like check calling us versus a small bet, and then who was saying that we get to check back? That's a move was saying if we bet small here, we get to kind of set a price on the river and essentially check back all rivers that are a 7 pretty much. So we get to kind of set our price. And then even if he does have like H through queens and he checks here, if we bet like third pot here on the turn, he probably just check calls, and then we kind of get to set our price and maybe lose the minimum here, because I would assume if this goes check check on the turn and then the river comes like a 3, I still think this guy can end up betting like queens through 9s for value on the river here and even choose like a bigger size here. So if we just block on the turn, we could kind of set our price against those hands that are beating us, as well as getting better hands to call. But I think overall, I think I'm mainly okay with checking and kind of reevaluating on the river here. So yeah, I think there's reasonings for both here. I would mainly check, but I definitely think like betting sometimes is good as well. And I remember what I did here, and I'm not sure if I like it, but I'll ask you guys what you want to do here after this goes check check on the turn and then our opponent checks to us again on the river. Do you guys think we have value here, or do you think we should just be showing down?
Weird spot.
Mm-hmm.
Bit of a weird one here, I would say.
I agree. Slammer says bet 8 bigs. I'm actually going to pull this up. Steve, you just want to keep up with the answers? I'm just kind of curious to see how this plays out. So I'm going to load this up right now.
Answers. Okay, bet 8 blue blind slammer. I bet like 3 bigs, 2 bigs. That's the move to get called by ace high. I think there's a little value to be had. I would definitely think we're ahead. I think you bet 1/3 pot and own ace jack, ace queen against unknown. I'd probably check. That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, it's an interesting kind of spot. Yeah, like you have to kind of find what hands you're going to be getting value from here. So I'd say, yeah, maybe like 4s, 3s, ace jack, ace queen is kind of maybe like an ace 2, like something like that, or he's has like a little bit of value and he can call you down on the river. Maybe like an ace 6.
Ace 6 of hearts, yeah.
Few hands he could maybe call you with, but it is interesting because I kind of agree with Found and Flood's point. My first instinct is saying probably to check back here because there's not enough hands you can get value with, but this is the type of opponent where he might call you with something really shitty if you bet small. Also, I would absolutely hate to get check shoved on the river here. I still think he's fairly uncapped in his full house range here. He could have pocket 6s, he could have pocket 2s, he could have pocket kings. So it's just a little interesting. I would probably check back and might be missing a little bit of value by doing that. I could see the argument for a very small bet too against an opponent like this who is just such a wild card and probably will make some weird calls with like an ace 2 and maybe an ace queen and some kind of 6x or pocket 4s. But we are stretching, I feel like, pretty hard to find all those hands you might call with.
Right.
Like it's probably five of them maybe or something. Maybe. And
yeah.
We're not impossible just calling ace queen, ace check obviously too. So.
Right. So yeah, some interesting points actually being brought up here. I think Final Flood says against this particular player, I think you could bet a third pot and own ace jack, ace queen. Against an unknown, probably check. That's a move says, or jam to get 8-8 a queen to fold. I don't think I'm necessarily trying to turn this hand into a bluff. Like I think it's good enough of the time where we're considering whether or not we get to value bet here. So I don't think I'm really interested in turning this specific hand into a bluff. Not really trying to target like 8s through queens here. I think we definitely have worse hands than this one that we can end up bluffing if we want to get those hands to fold. This one's probably a little bit too strong. Okay, what else do we have here? To be uncapped, you kind of have to know what that means in order to use it as an exploit. Yeah, I agree. Also, if we lose this person, if we lose to this person, the money is going to be given away anyway. It's not a reg that we don't want to give chips to. Yeah, that's a good point as well. The biggest factor for me is the 3.5x big blind open, and the check on the turn really makes me think he has pairs. Yeah, so all good points being made here. I also forgot to mention here on the turn why I kind of like betting sometimes is because on this specific king, sorry to kind of go back in time, but on this specific king, we actually hit this a fair amount, so we can kind of rep this because I think we're calling all king X of hearts and all king X of clubs here. So when the king of spades comes, we definitely have some kings in our range here as well. Go ahead, Steve. You were trying to say something?
Oh, no, sorry. Fiance was walking in.
Oh, word. Okay, so yeah, so that was just a quick point I was trying to make on the turn, why I think like betting at least sometimes with the sevens on the turn makes sense. Because although this specific king does hit our opponent's range, it also hits ours as well because we're calling all king X of hearts and king X of clubs on the turn. And when the king of spades comes, this card unblocks all those hands that we end up calling with. So I think this card is still like going to be better for him, but we definitely still have this as well, which is why I like betting on the turn. Now, once we get to the river, I think the biggest thing that came into my head at first was like, okay, this guy like 3.5x open, he bet pretty big on the flop. So the pot's already pretty bloated for just like an open and one C bet here. And I think I ended up checking back, which I initially don't like. I think with the result here too, actually, I don't think we actually would have ended up getting value here, but that's not necessarily why, like, I think it was good for us to check back here. Even though we wouldn't have made money, I still think there's going to be worse hands that he ends up calling us with here. Obviously, he has the jack 7 suited. Super wide c-bet here, just like nothing going on here. Definitely a loose open as well, but not the worst. But yeah, so for what it's worth, I think we probably do have value here. Also on the river, I don't think that we really get to bet smaller than 2/3 pot here. But versus like a random unknown here, I think we can kind of exploitively bet smaller to ensure that we do get called a little bit more by like some deuce X, some pocket threes, pocket fours, some ace 6 of hearts, maybe even some ace queen, ace jack, ends up making a crying hero call. So this would be a time where I know that Odin probably will tell us that we don't have any small bets, but if we're playing against some random like wild person who's not going to be able to figure out when we're exploiting them using a bet size we normally shouldn't be, I think we can still end up throwing it in there. So even though I think we can still probably bet like 2/3 for value and get called by worse, I think it might be better to exploitively bet small here in a spot that I normally wouldn't, just to try to get a crying call from our opponent here. And I do agree. Also, I think some of you guys are bringing up the fact that this player is uncapped, but again, he kind of has to know what that means as well. And I also don't think a lot of these type of players are really going to be disguising the value range as well as they should. Like, I don't think they're going to be trapping like ace 5 here, like pocket kings here. I think they're just going to bet like more often than not when they have these hands. So even though that's a factor, I'm not as worried about it as I would be playing against a more capable opponent. So yeah, a lot of interesting things going on here. A lot of exploits that we could end up talking about here. We can check out what Odin's doing just to kind of get an idea about how this hand should be played out. So what was it? King of spades, 6 of diamonds on the run out here. So yeah. So this is Odin's c-betting range here for 40 bigs effective, hijack versus button here. Odin's checking pretty heavily. Even though this board looks relatively dry, we still see a lot of checking here. I mean, the majority of bets are coming from like kings through 8s or 7s here pretty much. And then there's just like a lot of random betting going on with some ace highs here. Funny enough, we're seeing more betting from like the ace kings, the ace queens. The main instinct might be like, oh, we might check a little bit more with these because they're a little bit stronger. But I think these ace kings want to be betting a little bit more because button is still going to have to defend with some ace highs here as well. And obviously, like if we're betting ace king and they're still defending ace x's, they're obviously going to be defending worse ones. So we actually get some value when we see bet with ace king high here, which I think is pretty interesting. But either way, we'll just play it out as the hand went down. I'll say he ended up betting like 2/3 here. So it's going to be interesting to see what we do with 7s. Looks like 7s is basically pure calling here. And we see a little bit more raise with 8s and 9s. And I think those kind of go back to the reasons that Steve and I were talking about earlier, that there's just, when we raise with 9s and 8s, we get called by worse hands a little bit more. So I think this is why we see more pure call from the pocket 7s here. So, yep, we end up calling. Turn was the king of spades. And I'm pretty curious to see how aggressive our opponent's supposed to be here on the turn. It's going to look a little weird because our opponent's really not supposed to be c-betting here very much at all. So this is why you don't see a lot of hands actually coming up here. But yeah, on the king, our opponent is still supposed to be betting like 62% of the time. So pretty high frequency bet here on the turn from our opponent. And actually the Jack-7 does get in there a little bit. And it is doing a little bit of betting here for the 2/3 pot size. And then it's checking like another 68% of the time. So he does get some bet here with his specific hand. But as played, he ended up checking. And now it gets interesting again, whether or not we get to mix here. And it looks like we actually do get to mix, as we were saying. I think there's reasons for doing both. I don't think we really need to go over those again. But yeah, I think it's pretty interesting to see because I think a lot of you guys wanted to check in this spot. But I think it's also important to kind of ask yourself in game, like, you know, is there value from us betting here as well? I mean, the main instinct is check. This seems like a good card for our opponent, but you can see we're also going to have plenty of King X ourselves here. Like a lot of King X floats that we're going to have here, mainly with our heart and club portions that we have here. So it's not like this King is just like an absolute terrible card for us. But either way, we end up checking here. And river, I'm guessing, was like, what, 6 of diamonds? Something like that. And then I would assume our opponent's supposed to be pure bluffing with this hand. So Jack-7 of diamonds, yeah, it's pure bluffing here. It's just way too weak. This is like the weakest hand he's going to have here. So you can see it's actually playing as a jam more than anything else. Even though the jam doesn't come up here for, it looks like a 2x pot jam. That's what they're recommending to do here with the Jack-7 of diamonds. I think like this diamonds and spades want to pure jam here. And then it's basically like either like giving up or betting really small with the club and heart portions because you don't really want to be bluffing with the heart and club portions because like blocking flush draws and backdoor flush draws that I'm going to be floating and automatically folding to a bet are kind of bad cards to be having here. So that's why you see them full frequency bluffing with the spade and diamond combos and then mainly giving up with the heart and club combos. And because our opponent is uncapped, they get to introduce a little bit of big bet here as well. So it is a little weird that it doesn't come up here. And then it looks like it's mainly just like going for pot for its biggest size here. Mainly like pot and 1/3 pot block bet. But either way, when our opponent does show up here with Jack-7 of diamonds, they're definitely supposed to be bluffing here. Let's say, for example, he bets pot. I'm just kind of curious what our response should be. Yeah, even versus pot, we're doing a little bit of fold here with our pocket sevens here. So that's pretty interesting to see. I would assume for 2x pot, we are probably going to mainly be folding here. Pocket sevens. Yeah, it's actually mixing quite a bit the same. So it's kind of interesting that we're essentially calling the same frequency versus pot as we are 2x pot with this specific hand. So that's interesting. But anyway, let's go back to what we want to do here when we check and to see, one, if we get bet here on the river, and two, what sizes do we end up using here. So yeah, so you can see with sevens, they're definitely doing some mixing here. Like they're doing a little bit of betting and a little bit of checking. And if you guys can see here, Odin is not using a size smaller than 2/3 pot here on the river. And you're going to see this quite a bit when you are the last player to act on the river, mainly because when you do end up betting here, you're really not betting thinly for value. You're really just betting like your best hands and your best bluffs in this spot. And that's why when you're last to act, you really don't see anything smaller than 2/3 pot being used here. You can see half pot gets in, but only like 2% of the time. And then third pot is not even being used here. So they're basically telling us that we can bet for value for like 2/3 pot and bigger here. And it definitely mixes. Now, going back to what I was saying before, because our opponent is just some like random unknown, we could probably like exploitably bet like a little bit smaller here to basically ensure that we get called by a little bit weaker hands, and that particular opponent probably won't recognize what we're actually doing, that we're exploitably betting smaller to get a crying call from kind of a wild player. So in theory, you can see we obviously don't want to bet any smaller than 2/3, but against this particular opponent, I wouldn't mind doing it as an exploit for sure. So a lot of good stuff there, actually. Yeah, Final Flood says, I was only saying to value bet thin third pot versus this guy. Yeah. I picked up on what you were saying there for sure. And you actually brought up a good point there that I'm not sure if I would have remembered myself. But yeah, when we're playing against weaker players, we don't necessarily have to play exactly like Odin says. Like, this is how we exploit weaker players. We can do things that the chart, or that our solvers aren't going to tell us to do. This is how we get maximum value from weaker opponents who aren't going to be capable of recognizing when we're doing something that might be a little bit outside the box. Like, that's why we can take advantage of weaker players like this. So yeah, that was actually a good point that you brought up, Found and Fled. Not even sure if I would have remembered to cover that. So well done. So we'll do a few more hands here.
Good.
Probably go another 10 minutes, and then we'll take a few questions from you guys.
Yeah. Well, let's do it.
Sure. Skip ahead a little bit, see if we can get some action going. All right, it's going to be an open here for sure. Get to play with our friend again, probably. Oh, nice run out. Sucked out for a second. I think this is going to be a pretty easy check versus two opponents here. So we'll skip ahead here a little bit. I don't think there's a whole lot going on here. And I remember this pot. I think we ended up calling versus a c-bet. Turn went check, check. And then we got this river. Yeah. So, okay, this was, it looks like MP versus hijack here. We ended up floating versus a c-bet on the flop here. And turn went check, check. And then it checked to us on the river. So what are you guys doing in the spot here?
You see the action again, Kurt?
We called the hijack versus an MP open. We called versus a flop c-bet. I think it was like either third pot or half pot c-bet on the flop here. Turn went check, check, and then it checked to us on the river again.
Okay, I'll let people say. I just wanted to ask about the pre-flop spot. How often are you flatting here, and how often are you 3-betting?
This deep, I'm definitely going to mix 3-bets and calls. I'm definitely going to VPIP 100%, but I think the deeper we get, the more we can end up 3-betting some of these suited broadways. I think at like 50 bigs and under, they mainly want to be playing as flats. But once we get a little deeper, like in the 80 big blind plus region, we can start 3-betting these hands a little bit more. So yeah, definitely mixing here. Found and Flood says 2/3 bet, can't show down with this hand. Okay. I don't know if you guys got confused with the action here or not, but I guess Steve, what do you want to end up doing here? I'll wait for ESG, I guess, to chime in.
Yeah, I don't think you have any showdown value here at all. So, and I think you're repping quite a lot of aces. I mean, he definitely has ace-axis in his range too, but I think you have to put in a bet here. Just as well, you're going to win the hand, you're going to get like the king highs to fold, or like pocket sixes, pocket sevens, maybe a 5x, 8x. Maybe he's not opening that many 5x's, but a few of them, and I think you're still going to be getting enough hands to fold. So probably it's just going to be like a small bet for your whole range. I don't really see a reason to go huge here. I guess there is. The only reason would be maybe like sixes and sevens, like heroes you if you go too small. I probably won't be. So I don't know. Maybe like a half pot bet is even just fine. I don't bet half pot like too much. This might be a spot that's okay for it, or just like 6 big blinds or something like that. But I think it does feel like you got to put in a bet here. That's the only way you're going to win the hand.
Okay, I'm actually going to pull this up on Odin again real quick, so you guys can actually see it visualize a little bit more. And don't worry, ESG, your secret is safe with us. So single raise pot. We're going to run this at 100 bigs. DMC says one's tough, but I go between quarter to half pot. That's a move says I'm check raising you here if you bet. Just for your information. Okay. Is that because you can see my queen 10?
He's going
Okay. All right, so we'll play this out. I think I ended up betting here for 2/3 and got snapped by Jack 8. So, yeah, so we ended up betting here. And
no one ever has been folding to me in these kind of spots where I'm like, I had a hand on Poker Bros yesterday, Kurt, where, oh my God, I'm trying to remember this right now. It was like, it was King 5-3 flop, and I flatted it was like, we're both pretty short. Actually, I think this is a flat. It was button min raise. I have 6-4 suited in the big blind. Button has like 14 bigs. I have like the same stack. You know, it's like 40 left. It's like everyone's really shallow in the nightly $40 on Poker Bros. Flop is King 5-3, 2 spades. I have 6-4 spades. Check, check. Turn was a 9 of clubs, and I was kind of in between on this card, but this guy was playing pretty loose. I just decided to put in a bet. I think I bet like, I don't know, a little, like maybe 60% pot, expecting to go with it, 65%. And he calls. River's a 10, blank 10. So there's, you know, so I bricked.
Yeah.
I don't know if I should be bluffing here. It's a really close spot. I end up shoving. He snaps you to 9-7 offsuit.
Yeah. So a lot of times you want to be giving up with your spades, especially when you're blocking like straight and flush draws. But sometimes your weaker spades are actually played as jams a little bit more because you unblock like higher flush draws that they're gonna immediately be folding as well. So your hand probably mixes, but I wouldn't necessarily be like super discouraged in that spot either because again, this is just going back to like you just never know what people are going to do. Like, I don't think when you get caught bluffing, that should discourage you from bluffing again. I think it's just whether or not, like, you should be recognizing, like, is my specific combo good for bluffing or should I be giving up here? I think those are really the main questions we want to be asking and not necessarily being results oriented by whether or not we get called or we get folds. Because there's definitely spots that, like, I've bluffed before that Odin never bluffs that I get folds, and I'm not like necessarily happy about it, you know, like the spot worked out, but I still misplayed the hand, you know, so like we have to be honest with our assessments, you know what I mean, in spots like that. So I think people get like way too caught up on the results as opposed to what the best play should actually be. So yeah, anyway, yeah, I don't hate your bluff for what it's worth. And again, who knows, like, if what that guy's calling down, like, we have no idea. If anything, like, that just tells you that you're going to get called even more when you have value in a spot like that. So, yeah, it happens that you end up getting in the spot where the guy's just, like, not folding anything, so.
Yeah, no, it has a classic Poker Bros hand history, I would say. You know, there's just a lot of hand histories that are very similar to that. It's pretty funny.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll read the comments here real quick before we hop into Odin. That's a move says, yeah, I don't think you get called folds here by anything better. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think we definitely get a hand like Queen Jack, King Queen, King Jack. I think all these hands end up c-betting flop and end up folding, at least at some percentage. Also, we are pretty bottom of our range here. So if we aren't bluffing this hand, then what hand are we going to bluff? Like 10-9 of clubs? Like, yeah, I think that hand ends up bluffing too. But we don't have a lot of worse hands than this one, I wouldn't say. Also, we are going to have some ace-x in our range as well. So, like, for example, we're going to be floating some ace-7 of clubs we can have here. Even, like, some ace-9 of clubs we can have and definitely check back here. So, it's not like we never have ace-x here either. So, if we're going to have value bets here, like, we need to have bluffs. And I don't see, like, many worse hands than this specific one here to end up bluffing. So, and I'm not even necessarily saying his call is bad. I'm more concerned with whether or not this hand should actually be bluffing or not. And I think that's what we really need to be looking at in the spot. So we'll check that out here in just a second. DMC says, I'm betting and check snapping about even with Jack 8. Also, I can't not fire that river based on the action and stack size. Ishi says, if you don't get called bluffing, you're not bluffing enough, right? Yes, that is 100% true. If you're never caught bluffing, you are not bluffing enough. DMC says something with my hand. I recall reading that somewhere. Where am I? Betting snap. I guess I'm kind of lost with that one, DMC. Just to elaborate for my stupid brain. Okay. Yeah, so I guess, what do you think here, Steve, overall? Are you bluffing this river, or And again, this could be a give up on my spot. We'll check it out once we review it. Yeah, what are you doing in this specific spot here?
With the queen 10 on the river.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I already said it, but I would be just putting in a small bet on the river. Probably won't go huge, but like obviously called you a decade to a 2/3 bet, so
Okay.
He's probably not going to fold to a 1/3 bet with any of. I think I initially said I'd go like half pot or something.
Okay. And yeah, and for what it's worth, I think we can even go like 2/3 as light as like ace-7, ace-9. I think our ace-x can bet this big. I mean, if he's calling with an 8 here, he's going to be calling with like pocket 7s, pocket 6s, pocket 9s, stuff like that. So if he's calling with all those hands, then we definitely have like a big bet here with the if we have an ace in the spot. Now, we'll just check this out. Again, this is at 100 big blinds. You can see how often our opponent's checking here in the spot. And this is like, I guess the one thing that kind of threw me off is I know in theory that this player is supposed to be checking quite a bit on a board like this. So when I see them bet, they're probably a little bit on the strong side or on the stronger side than they should be, and probably playing their hand a little bit more than they are like worried about their range and how bad this board is for them. So you see a ton of checking here, mainly because of how deep we are and how bad the board is for the pre-flop raiser's range. That's why you see them essentially pure checking here. But we're just going to go with the c-bet here, just because that's how our opponent ended up playing it. Then you can see with the queen 10 of clubs, we are pure calling here, basically with the backdoor flush draw and the 2 overs, as well as the backdoor straight draw. Turn was, what was it? Ace of hearts, 3 of diamonds. So ace of hearts. And then this is going to look really weird on the turn because essentially we're not going to have any hands here because Odin really doesn't c-bet here on the flop almost ever. But we'll go to the jack 8 of diamonds, which they also don't have at this stack depth here, so I guess it doesn't really matter. I guess 10-8 of diamonds is going to be the closest thing that we have here. So with 10-8 of diamonds, they are pure checking here. In general, they're still checking quite a bit on this card, 77% of the time. I don't think we're going to get a really accurate output from this player's perspective, but we can at least get something somewhat accurate from ours. And for what it's worth, I think we probably get the mix with our hand here, and we actually don't with the queen 10 of clubs. I guess they're saying this hand is not strong enough to be bluffing here, and I guess if this hand is going to bluff, it probably only wants to bluff for one street, which will more than likely be the river. And you can also see that once we get to the turn here, we are definitely checking some ace-x here. Like, we're actually checking ace-queen, ace-jack, ace-10 at a pretty high frequency. And this might mainly be because we're seeing bets from our opponent that don't really happen. So I think we might be a little bit more on the cautious side with our 1-pair ace-x combos, and then betting a little bit more aggressively with our 2-pair and our ace-x that has a straight draw to go with it. So yeah, kind of interesting here. So we pure check on the turn. And then the river, we'll just say it was 3 clubs, kind of irrelevant. And then with the 10-8, I wouldn't be surprised if our villain gets some block bet here, although it does look like they are pure checking in this spot. So face another check, and now the question is, do we end up bluffing? And it looks like we are pure bluffing in the spot, mainly because this is saying this is one of the weaker hands that we're going to have in this position, that this shows down like never. So essentially, if we're going to win this spot, we need to end up bluffing here. And not only for that reason, but it's also one of the weakest hands we're going to have. So this is why we see a lot of bluffing coming from the queen jack down to the 10-9 region here, pretty much. And yeah, and you can see the only size, they don't even offer a block size here. The smallest size that they're offering here is 2/3 pot. And I also don't think we get to go much bigger than this either, because we really don't have, like, we never check back the turn with straights or sets here. So like, we can still go big, but we can't necessarily go huge because we don't necessarily have like super nutted hands here. We never have a deuce. Essentially, the strongest hand we're going to have here is pocket 3s. So that's why you see like a very tiny amount, like where 48% of the time we're betting 2/3, and 2/3 of the time we're betting 1.5x pot. So you can see that 3s is like by far the strongest hand we're going to wind up at the river with here, and that's why they mix in a little bit of big bet here. But I would mainly just bet like 2/3 with my entire range here, pretty much. So yeah, it's pretty interesting to see that this is pretty consistent again, showing that on the river, when we are the in-position player and we're last to act, we're really not going smaller than 2/3 pot in spots like this. And since we are a little bit, like, we do still have some hands that are good enough to bet, but not necessarily like super nutted hands. So this is why you don't see really any overbet being implemented here as well. So yeah, I think this is a pretty interesting spot for us to wrap up on. And again, I think this is kind of important just so because I see a lot of regulars too, at least like, you know, decent winning regulars who will get to the river like this and end up using like a block size or a half pot size where it's just not a thing ever. So I think it's kind of important for you guys to recognize that when we do get to the river, we really don't have thin value bets in spots like this. We either have a hand that's good enough to bet big for value, or we check back, basically. So yeah, this is pretty relevant information to pick up. And for the other spot that we talked about too, when we were playing it against a weaker player, I don't mind exploitively like block betting to try to get like a crying call from a weaker player. I still think that's absolutely fine. But in terms of what we should be doing overall, once we get to the river in these spots, we're really not implementing any block bet, any kind of thin value. We're either betting big enough with a hand that's good enough to value bet, or we're just showing down a hand that's not quite good enough to bet for a size bigger than two-thirds pot or bigger. So yeah, interesting spot to end on. You got anything to add to that, Steve?
Not really, man. I think you hit it on the head here.
Okay.
I think you nailed it on the head here with the Odin explanation too. I mean, makes sense.
Okay.
Overall, I mean, just yeah, it's interesting just because like I was saying, I'm getting heroed a lot in these kind of like good bluff spots. I feel like that I just don't, you know, I don't know, don't necessarily getting folds as much. You know, people just seem like extra like calling in random spots, but it also just makes me want to think more about like, okay, I could probably be getting some good value in some spots and be trying to expand my value ranges in certain moments because I'm just getting called with like absurd shit sometimes. So it's kind of interesting.
Right. So I think that's a good point that you touch on. So if anything, if you guys feel like you're getting heroed quite a bit, then start betting a little bit more thinly for value. Like if they're calling you with hands that they shouldn't be, that means you can expand your value range pretty much. So these times where you might think you're not getting called by a better hand, you might actually be, because I mean, we hear this all the time. I say it all the time. Like nobody folds. Nobody folds when they have any kind of pair. So if that's the case, then we essentially need to expand our value range, because if they're not folding, that means we can value bet a little bit more thinly. You know what I mean? So it's always important to kind of figure out not only what type of opponent you're playing against, but to always ask yourself, am I getting called by worse hands? You should always really be looking to get very thin value. I think this is what really separates a lot of like very strong players from some mediocre to weaker players. They're not only are they going for thin value in spots where other people might not be, but they're also not afraid to go for thin value. They're not always saying like, oh, I'm gonna go for thin value here, but my opponent could check raise me. Like, yeah, that could happen, but that shouldn't discourage you from going for thin value in spots where you think you might still get called. Because, yeah, they might still have a portion of their range that's going to check raise either for value or as a bluff, but they're still going to have hands that they need to hero you off with at the same time. So don't let, you know, the fear of what might happen kind of take you away from what you should actually be doing in game. You know, I think that happens quite a bit, that a lot of people don't want to make a specific play for fear of something that hasn't even happened yet. I mean, it should be part of your thought process, but you shouldn't let it completely discourage you. Same goes with bluffing. Like, yeah, you could get hero called in a spot where they shouldn't be hero calling you, but you shouldn't let that discourage you from bluffing. I mean, if you have a specific read that there's a guy who's absolutely wild, who's not folding anything, then yeah, maybe tighten up your bluffing range, like give up in spots you normally wouldn't, and then add in some value bets with hands you would normally just show down because this guy's not folding anything. So there's always exploits you can make, and it's good to be asking yourselves these questions in game. And once we get you guys actually recognizing these spots in game, you're going to see a lot of improvement throughout you know, your win rates, of course. So, and that's really the biggest thing, not only to recognize these when we're studying, but to be able to figure out these spots while we're actually playing as well. So yeah, anything else to add to this? Appreciate it, Slammer. Yes, Steve's extremely active. You can see why he gets hero called quite a bit. Yeah, that makes sense. You should actually feel good about that too.
Dude, on Poker Bros, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, you could be the biggest net ever in this dude.
Trust me. No, Dijon, if he was around, would tell you. I think he's the one who plays on there a lot. It's a wild sight.
Nice, nice.
It's a unique atmosphere. Like I think it's hard to describe play on there.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, DMC. I think it's a really good point to cover here too. Like we can't play afraid. You know what I mean? You gotta be okay with going for it. You know, sometimes the spot's not going to end up well, but that shouldn't discourage you from trying to make the best possible decision that you can. Yeah, 100%. I think people really have a hard time going for thin value for fear of, being check raised, either bluffed or check raised for value. So, and for the most part, when you are playing in weaker fields, you should worry about that even less because, again, I don't think that people are disguising their value range as well as their, like, finding the check raise bluff range that they're going to have on the river. So, the fear of you actually like have people like trapping you or check raise bluffing you on rivers is going to be even like lower than if you're playing against stronger players. So this is why it's even more important that you go for thin value versus weaker players because when you do get check raise, you can just be like, okay, well they have it, like because nobody bluffs in this spot ever, especially not weaker players. So and then at the same time, they're mostly just betting when they have value, not looking to like check raise trap some of their stronger hands because most players are like, oh, the guy checked the turn, so if I don't bet for value on the river, he's just going to check back the river, and that's not necessarily how it goes, pretty much. So essentially, the weaker the players you're playing against, the more you should be trying to go for thin value.
All right, guys, it's been a good one.
Yep.
Appreciate all y'all.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta get to a phone call too, but this is I think the program we use right there. I think it's called Flashback Express. Is that what it's called, Kurt? Is it the wrong program I'm sending?
Yep. Oh, it captures your PC screen. Yeah, I think I used to use Flashback actually before. Yeah. Oh, this is the one that you have for us, right? This is what I've been recording with.
Yeah. That's what I was asking what we use. Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks everyone. Great session for sure. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Kurt. Great stuff as always. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you guys showing up. Hope you guys are digging these sessions. And it looks like next week we're going to be covering Agora's hand history. Did we hear?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
As long as I'll talk to him. He recorded it last night. He was literally I was streaming last night. He was like recording it, and so I'm like, yeah, we'll probably review that over like 2 days or something.
All right, nice. So
I think he had a few tables. I told him to have like a few tables. So I don't know if at the end he did, but I think at the beginning at least he did. So
all right, cool.
A lot of good stuff to review. So
yeah, so this will be fun. This will be the first time we actually go over some of our members' footage. So this will be a good one to kick off next week. Also, if you guys want to do this in the future, if you want to record some of your footage as well, we can definitely cover this. If you want to share it with the group, if not, that's absolutely fine. I just want you guys to be open to making this a thing if we end up liking this. So yeah, we'll hop on that next week. Hopefully, I will be streaming a little bit later today, so check out for that. It looks like my internet's working a lot better today than it was yesterday, so hopefully we have no problems. But yeah, we'll cut it off for now. Appreciate it, Steve. Appreciate everybody for showing up. We should have this video posted by sometime tomorrow, so if you guys want to check it out again, we'll have it then. So yeah, till then, good luck on the tables, and I'll see you guys around. Thanks, guys.
Sounds good. Kurt, did you say you might play today?
Yeah.
Is that what you said? Okay. All right, sounds good. Yeah, Kurt's. We might play today. Then we got the Intro to Poker show, I believe. It's at 5 p.m. Eastern. Don't quote me. I have to check the calendar. So we got that. Kurt's gonna play, and then I might play later or tomorrow. And tomorrow's another community tournament. I'll post the flyer, the prizes for that. And we have some cool new roles in the room, guys. We got 3 new roles. So if you're top 10 in the monthly TLB the month before, you're gonna be top 10 monthly TLB. The number 1 ranked guy for the last month will be number 1 ranked, and then everyone who has won an event in 2022 will be in the winner's circle.
Nice.
So cool little badges, guys, and those badges are going to start earning you rewards in the future, starting in March after the mint. So
nice.
Keep that in mind. You're going to want to do well in these tournaments, or you're going to hope to want to do well.
Yep.
There'll be badges also for participation, active participation, and watching videos. That's going to be a little more on the road here in a couple months. So
nice, cool stuff. Nice.
For sure.
Yep. All right, guys.
Appreciate all y'all.
Yep. Appreciate it, guys. Catch you around.